I'm Adrienne Pedersen. Right now on Up Front. Massacre inside a Texas elementary school. This weekend, the gun debate now raging in Wisconsin. Calls for universal background checks, proposals to arm teachers. Lawmakers and advocates on both sides are here.
I don't know how many more shootings we have to go through for us to actually do something.
Teachers have refused to be armed. I think the teachers are standing in the way of a solution.
What's next in Wisconsin? Then bipartisan legislation prompting change for sexual assault survivors. An exclusive look inside the new Wisconsin tracking system just announced by the Justice Department. And honoring our fallen servicemen and women this Memorial Day weekend. The new venture bringing in a new generation and trading their stories for generations to come.
Taking on the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Up Front with your host, Adrienne Pedersen.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. The debate over the state and nation's gun laws immediately reignited following the deadly school shooting in Texas. Police say an 18-year-old gunman shot and killed 19 students and 2 teachers inside an elementary school in Texas. Democratic Representative Deb Ondraka, an educator and early advocate with Moms Demand Action, and Nick Clark, president of Wisconsin Carry, are both standing by. But first, a divided Governor Tony Evers and Assembly Speaker Robin Vos, the governor who's called on GOP lawmakers to pass a red flag law and stronger background checks, released a recorded address this past week.
Just last month, the legislature sent me a bill that would have allowed certain people to possess loaded guns on school grounds. A bill that would be law today if I hadn't vetoed it. And so to my Republican colleagues, I want to be clear today. I will work with any Republican who wants to find common ground, who wants to make progress on gun safety, who wants to pass legislation a majority of Wisconsinites will support.
Republican Assembly Speaker Robin Vos with our Kent Wainscott.
Typical Tony Evers, insincere. So what he did is he sends out an email to Republican legislators saying, call my aide if you're interested. That is not sincere.
Do you support the idea of arming teachers in the classroom?
We need to do a better job of making sure that we have security personnel inside a school. So it should be a retired law enforcement officer. It could be an on-duty police officer. It could be somebody who's a security officer. That's what I think more schools should have. So yes, I said I think we need to have somebody who has the ability to respond.
Including teachers?
It could be teachers, right? That's what I had said. I don't think that's the worst idea. But again, I think it should first of all be a local option. But at the same point, I think we need to have more security inside schools, period. I think having somebody with background and training would be the very best. But at the same point, when we saw what happened in Texas, even people with a background and training sounds like they might not have responded as quickly as they should have. So having somebody inside the school, where it was a school safety officer or a school resource officer, probably would have saved lives.
And with that, we are joined now by Democratic Representative Deb Ondraka, an educator and member of the State Assembly. So Representative, welcome to Up Front.
Thanks for having me, Adrienne.
So we just want to start there. You've been a substitute teacher. Should teachers be armed?
No, I don't think guns belong in schools. I was a substitute teacher. I am also a gun owner. I have my concealed carry license. And I don't know any teachers who think that this is a good idea. And all this talk about arming schools and fortifying schools, it really distracts from the real problem, which is easy access to guns. And it does nothing for the gun violence that a lot of our communities here in Milwaukee and all around the state experience every single day.
So you don't think teachers in Texas, if they would have been armed, that could have potentially saved lives?
Well, in 2019, Texas passed a similar law that allowed teachers to, who were licensed, have guns in the classroom. And Robb Elementary School had a very detailed emergency plan in place. They tried it. It didn't work. We know it does work. We know that to prevent gun violence, we need to make sure that every gun sale has a background check. We need extreme risk protection orders so that when we know that there is someone who might harm themselves or others, we have the ability to get the firearm away from them so they can't commit violence. And we also need to make sure that we don't allow people who have a history of domestic violence to get guns either. So we know what works. I think all options should be on the table, but those are the things that I would start with.
Do you want to see the legislature come back into session for this? And do you think there's any Republican support based on what you've been hearing over the last few days?
Well, I would love to see the legislature come back into session. Myself, my colleagues, we're ready to go to work. Governor Evers sent a letter to the Republican leadership saying that he would like to see them come back into session. I was inspired to run for office the very first time he had a special session. So it was 2019. The first session that he had was trying to get the legislature to take action on gun violence. At the time, I was sitting up in the gallery in the assembly, watching everybody do their legislative work, and they gavelled in and gavelled out in a matter of seconds. So they were unwilling to take action then. I don't know how many more shootings we have to go through for us to actually do something. 80% to 90% of Wisconsin voters want the state legislature to do something. And it is up to us to take action, and we're here and we're willing.
And you're a relatively new state representative. Is there any disconnect between what you're hearing in schools and your time with Moms Demand Action and then the debate that's going on at the Capitol?
We know what works, and we asked for bills on background checks on all gun sales, extreme risk protection orders, domestic violence.
Why is it not happening then? I mean, I know that Republicans, some of them you say do support these things. So why is it not happening?
You'd have to ask my colleagues. As a freshman in the minority, I don't have the power to call a public hearing. I don't have the power to make the legislature do something. That's more. That is a question for Republican leaders.
All right. Laura Representative, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Nick Clark is the president of Wisconsin Carry, a gun rights group. So, Nick, welcome back to Upfront. Thanks for being with us. You've heard the calls for expanded background checks and a red flag law. There's even bipartisan talks going on right now on Capitol Hill about these. Are these things you think you could support, and what about the gun community overall?
Yeah, I mean, first, answer to your first question is no, not something that we could support. And the gun community overall, I mean, I think, I can't speak for everybody, but I think most have realized that every time, whether it's even murders in Milwaukee or the shooting in Buffalo or anything, that it's the same calls for the same gun control, which wouldn't have worked in any of these circumstances.
And I think the follow-up question to that and kind of the pushback would be, what would responsible gun owners be so afraid of them when it comes to expanded background checks?
Sure. Well, and let me start by saying the first thing I would pose is in this particular situation, the school door wasn't even locked. So they're going to ask gun owners, every gun owner, for example, universal background checks. They want to ask every gun owner who right now could sell a gun to their uncle, to their brother, and you don't have to go to a gun store to transact that, nor have that registered permanently with the government. They're saying, we want all of you to go, millions of gun owners to go through that step, but they wouldn't even lock the door of the school.
The assault rifle has been used in so many of these mass shootings. Why not ban that in Wisconsin? Why would a civilian need that type of weapon?
Well, I sure hope that that these lunatics don't figure out what a more effective weapon would be, because there are much more effective weapons. The AR style, the AR platform rifle is so sensationalized in the national television media that I think that's why these shooters pick it. They think it's a magical gun. And again, I wouldn't even share on the air, but there's weapons that are far more common hunting weapons that would be far more deadly in a mass shooting situation. And so let's hope that if they ban the AR-15, which they won't, but I mean, if they were to do that, the next option for these lunatic shooters would be a weapon that would be much more deadly. And even the conversation, like, we don't talk about the things that would really solve the problem. I mean, first, locking the school door. I mean, that could have prevented this whole thing. And so why don't we talk about the easy solutions? And then we get into things like, if we want to have a balanced conversation, let's talk about arming teachers, or if teachers refuse to be armed, I think the teachers are standing in the way of a solution. The problem here is that the only person you can be sure is going to act in your self-defense is you. And in the case of students, we're obviously not going to have armed students, but so the teacher is the last line of defense. When everything else fails, when the FBI background checks fail, when all these other things fail, when they fail to lock the school doors, the only person we can count on would be a teacher.
Do you understand, though? I mean, I just talked to a teacher who said a lot of teachers are not comfortable having a gun.
Well, we don't need to arm every teacher. We would just need to arm some teachers. And I think that would be a huge deterrent.
All right. Well, the conversation certainly continues. Nick Clark with Wisconsin Carry. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian.
Coming up, a new tool for survivors of sexual assault, and it's holding the state accountable. Next, Upfront is taking you exclusively inside the new program at the Justice Department.